I've mentioned it before because it's Konstantin Kairos has a blog, and I think it's WWE. Goodness, let's see. I actually have it linked in here.
W concussion lawsuit, I think.
Yeah, WWE concussion lawsuit news.com is the full link, and he writes, and so you can find things like. He has a picture of all the books about wrestling that he's used as resources for this. And so it's everything from the Fall Guys up to Bret Hart's book, but has a lot of other random books sitting there. He has occasionally pictures of him and some of the wrestlers. Like there was one of him and Don Leo Jonathan. He wrote, a little tribute to, was it Blackjack Wyndham, who just died a few months ago? Yeah, so things like that. And then he'll comment sometimes on what's happening on the court thing. And then at the same time, he'll sometimes upload his filings on whatnot. And so he's been admonished by the court a little bit for this because there's been sometimes this echo chamber where he'll file something and then comment on it and then then use that as an example of it being in the news, kind of being like, here, look at this filing. Hey, Boston newspaper says that CTE, Legacy Institute is getting WWE funding and therefore is corrupt. And be like, look at this article from Boston. And then you'll file a court thing being like, look at how this is being covered. And so it kind of becomes a big loop. I didn't explain that well, but it's funny. So he's been yelled at a little bit for doing this. And I've talked to other lawyers and they've said, yeah, we don't know a lot of lawyers that blog about their own cases while they're happening. So this is kind of weird.
So why didn't the judges yelled at him for doing this? And so what's the reasoning behind that?
I think the judge has yelled at him for including extraneous information in all of his filings and trying to file things that they believe is more about getting media attention than actually is a legal motion. So they'll say, I want to bring the court's attention to this article written about, the Concussion Legacy Institute. Well, that's not necessarily related to did WWE have knowledge of CTE when they authorized, Billy Jack Haynes to wrestle. That's not a relevant thing. And so he's been yelled at for that. The WWE counsel has also kind of jumped on this blog thing before, but that's more what he's been admonished for is basically just filing things that may not actually have a legal precedence of why they're being filed beyond just trying to win in the court of opinion, public opinion. So what happened is on the 27th, basically Judge Bryant, who is the lead judge in this case, ruled that within 35 days, the plaintiffs have to file amended pleadings which comply with the federal rules of procedure and set forth a factual basis for the claims or defenses clearly and concisely in numbered paragraphs. Again, expressing the frustration she's had with the filings. Within 35 days, they have to have in-camera review affidavits signed and sworn under the penalty of perjury, setting forth the facts within each plaintiff's or defendant's personal knowledge that form the basis of their claim that says basically when did they wrestle for WWE, its agents or affiliates, it's the first date and the last date, if they wrestled for more than one person or entity, who they wrestled for and for what period of time, whether they ever signed any agreements or documents in connection with their engagement to wrestle by or for the WWE or any of its agents or affiliates, whether they're in possession of any of the documents, whether they have W-4s, W-2s, 1099s, and then for each and every claim or defense in the wrestler's pleading, they must say a specific paragraph to the complaint, a when and where did this happen, and the identities of all people present, and then any and all other facts known that forms the basis of belief that WWE or its agents or affiliates should have known that wrestling caused traumatic brain injuries, including CTE, and basically says the court assumes that Attorney Kairos will have a good faith belief that the allegations in the complaint were true based on the interviews with the clients, and they should have no problem producing these affidavits within 35 days because, of course, they never would have filed them with a federal court unless they could perfectly prove these things.
So are we talking about video interviews? It says camera review affidavits?
Yeah, it says in-camera review affidavits. I don't know exactly what that means, but I assume that means they got to get them to swear on tape in some way, whether it's through, I don't know whether a written statement notarized would be enough. I'll have to ask that to lawyers, but I just thought, wow, that's a big ask, right? Get all those lawyers or all those wrestlers within 35 days to give you all that amount of information.
So what is the judge's concern here? Is it sort of like these wrestlers are telling weird stories here, and it's not very specific?
Basically, she's saying that all of the claims that are being made here have been pretty much thrown out for statute of limitations, or not being relevant, or not explaining who it was that was supposed to have been responsible for these actions. And so she's basically saying, I'm going to throw out the entire suit. I'm going to allow WWE's motion to basically dismiss the complaint to go through, unless you can come back and show affidavits saying how each of these wrestlers can give examples of how this has really happened to them, and that it was WWE wrestling that made this happen. I think she's very dubious of the fact that some of these people really did not work for WWF or have not worked for them for 30 plus years, and they wrestled for other people much after that. But yeah, it seems to be very very close to ending the whole lawsuit, to be really honest. It was funny.
Within 35 days of September 27th, which would be sometime in late October,
is when they're supposed to file this. Now, will there be an extension?
November, maybe. Yeah.
I could see, I could see them filing for an extension, and then there being a court fight over whether or not there can be an extension. You know how these things can be. But I imagine, he's working on it. He's doing something. He's making a last-ditch effort. I wouldn't be surprised if it peeled off some of the plaintiffs. I could see some of these people that have the weakest claims maybe disappearing, and then just ending up with just to be honest, the people that don't have dementia and are still with us. So, can Jimmy Snuka's widow really testify to any of this? That sort of thing.
Well, I mean, she lived with them, right? So she could describe dementia-like behavior.
No, but I mean, but the specific events, the 5 things that they're saying the plaintiffs have to speak to, who they worked for, and this and that. Okay. I just don't know whether that's going to really happen. So I'll be very curious. It was curious to see Kairos's take on it. She said. They've ordered the wrestlers to refile the WWE lawsuit. In doing so, she rendered moot and denied all earlier attempts by the WWE to dismiss the case. The result is that the wrestler plaintiffs have another opportunity to make their case and refine their arguments about WWE's responsibilities before the court. Significantly, Judge Bryan also asked for private statements to be submitted directly to the court from every plaintiff involved in this lawsuit. I think it's a little weak to call it private statements as much as like proof that you're actually representing people that want to have their name attached to a lawsuit. Because I think there's been a little bit of concern, too, that possibly some of these wrestlers don't know the claims that are being submitted on their behalf, and that they might all be on contingency, and so they don't really see it as a downside for them because it's just like they're not paying the legal bills. Mm-hmm. But I think the judge is making it a lot more discreet about, kind of saying these people under the penalty of perjury are now, saying that all of this stuff is true. And you might get some people who say they don't want to, try and put this lawyer's phraseology in their mouth.
Hmm. And if they're actually asking for video interviews or something, or video in-camera review affidavits, isn't Tom Billington a part of this?
Yeah, sort of. He's part of the very complex Wyndham action.
Tom Billington is the Dynamite Kid, by the way.
Yeah, so you have the Laurinaitis action, which is pretty much all the people suing for WWE CTE. And that's like
the point I'm trying to get at is like you got somebody overseas. Are you going to get a video?
Oh yeah.
With,
What it gets funny is the Laurinaitis action is all the wrestlers suing. The Wyndham action was actually WWE suing the wrestlers who are about to sue them. So they sued Blackjack Mulligan, they sued the Dynamite Kid, they sued Koko Beware, and they sued Ivan Koloff. And so it's a weird one where it's like most of this is the people suing WWE, but WWE actually sued these other wrestlers thinking they were about to sue them in kind of a like countermeasure. It was really weird. So, but yes, Dynamite Kid is actually part of the Wyndham action. So, but technically it says it's the Laurinaitis action or the Wyndham defense. So. the Wyndham defendants and the Laurinaitis plaintiffs. So again, the judge had very harsh words for the lawyer. At one point she said, and this might not sound as tough as it is, but it says, despite repeatedly requesting the plaintiff's counsel to exclude irrelevant allegations and ensure that each claim in the consolidated case had a reasonable factual and legal basis, the court, in an abundance of deference to the wrestler plaintiffs and to the detriment of the WWE, applied a liberal pleading standard more suited to a pro se plaintiff than to a licensed attorney asserting claims on behalf of an entire class. And so basically she was saying that he was acting like a lawyer that was like someone representing themselves who doesn't have a legal background rather than someone who's supposedly a licensed attorney, which is, obviously an insult.
The Wyndham here is Blackjack Mulligan.
Family of? Is that who I'm thinking of? Would that be Blackjack Mulligan's last name would be Wyndham?
Google will tell us.
Yeah, Robert Wyndham.
Okay. Yeah. So that's Bray Wyatt and Bo Dallas's grandfather who recently passed away, right?
Yes, exactly. And Barry Wyndham's father.
If there's any political consequence, does that for Bray Wyatt and or Bo Dallas in WWE?
I mean, this lawsuit's been going on for years,
right?
And
it's nothing new. Yeah.
No, it's nothing new at all. Yeah. No, but I mean that this lawsuit is a reason why you will sometimes see a muted response to some of these people's deaths. I'm trying to think if Snuka had joined the suit before he died. He did. So that was interesting too, that he was suing them. Even still, his widow was suing them on his behalf, actually, because Snuka at the time was still basically they filed it as if he was legally incompetent.
And WWE on TV certainly acknowledged the death of Jimmy Snuka.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think they acknowledged Blackjack Mulligan's passing too.
Yes, they do. I think they did a graphic.
Despite the fact that both of those people were suing them right before their deaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, strange bedfellow. And so that's part of it, is that it's not necessarily driving all the political decisions, but it does drive some of them. And that's why, again, that headbutt spot is so egregious in some cases, because you could say, you're really being sued right now on television about concussion issues and traumatic brain injuries and whatnot. So,
but as Dave Lugano pointed out, there's a lot of things that interest us about that interview segment with Kevin Owens from several weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So that just was really fascinating to me, because I've been talking about the CTE lawsuit saying, I don't think it's ever going to end in a big win. I think this is a lot more dramatic of a restatement than I expected, for her to basically be like, you have to refile, make these claims discreet, and get everyone to testify that they actually know that they're in this lawsuit and they know what they're being claimed. And some of this came because I think Evan Singleton at one point under deposition was asked a question and basically said, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, well, you made these claims in your lawsuit, so what do you mean you don't know what you're talking about? And so I think some of that was kind of the basis of it, of being like, well, if there's a fear that the lawyer is in some way putting words in their mouth that maybe that doesn't give them standing anymore.
And Evan Singleton is a developmental wrestler for WWE who I think never got out of FCW, right?
Yeah, so Singleton and LaGrasso, which is Big Vito, they were pretty much the only two wrestlers who have a claim right now that has basically been continued on with. Everyone else, in theory, the statute of limitations should have applied to. Essentially, I mean, it gets technical about whether or not you want to use kind of coal mine legislation to say that when someone is injured in a way that is, you're not going to know that it's going to hurt them until years later, that somehow the statute of limitations shouldn't apply.
So the statute of limitations in this case is about how many years?
Let's see here. I think it's something like, it's two things. Number one, it would be, like when the independent contractor lawsuit went up with Raven and whatnot. I don't remember how many years it was, but whether it was 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, but it was some amount of time since the end of their contract, and they didn't file on that time. The other statute of limitations was that basically the court has established that if it's before the year of, I want to say 2005, I might need to revise that to 2009. I would have to reread it. But basically, they said there's a certain date in which you could say WWE knew that CTE existed and that head trauma was bad. And after that, you have to prove that they're willingly negligent. Prior to that, they're basically saying you can't accuse WWE of things because they didn't know it was bad. And of course, the counter argument has been, oh, we've known about punch drunk boxer syndrome for years and all this other stuff we've always known as bad. But what the judge ruled was all the claims that happened before a certain year, I want to say it was 2005, that they're just completely out. And so the only people left that were kind of in the lawsuit that had performed more recently than that, especially under contract, were like Evan Singleton and Vito LaGrasso.
I would think certainly by 2007 when Chris Benoit dies and they look at his brain and see all sorts of tau proteins, by then that's when it starts to become a conversation that people have.
Kind of the date WWE is using as theirs, is to basically argue that was the first time that this was brought up, and then the other people are saying
that's probably the moment where they stop doing chair shots to the head, right?
Yeah, and Bennett Amalu's paper when it got published was in the early 2000s, and so the other people are saying, well, this is the very basic time when you should have known, and so they argue a little bit about it, but at one point basically the judge made it a line in the sand saying, I'm only going to look for claims that come after this date that show me that WWE was being willfully negligent after this date. But yes, exactly. That's when you see them changing. That's when you start seeing Dr. Maroon talking about, head trauma and giving those. We talked a few weeks ago about Mojo. Was it Mojo Rawley getting into an argument with him or Baron Corbin?
Baron Corbin, yeah.
Yeah, so Baron Corbin. And it was, again, at one of these like head trauma discussions with WWE Medical that they apparently are doing periodically. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens with this case. I did not expect it to kind of move this dramatically. I kind of thought it would just continue to play out kind of claim by claim, plaintiff by plaintiffs. And so it's kind of neat to see them hit the reset button, because I do think it's actually in everyone's best interest for that to happen, because I do think that Kairos's filings are littered with irrelevant legal discussions, and as the judge puts it, sometimes appearing to be for an audience besides the court, i.e. wrestling writers like me and you. So it will be interesting just to see, because a lot of it is also that conspiracy theory stuff where basically his side has been very much pushing the whole idea that says WWE gives a bunch of money to the Sports Legacy Institute, and then the Sports Legacy Institute stops looking at wrestler brains and diagnosing CTE, and therefore WWE is trying to willfully hide CTE in wrestlers.
Yeah. Well, if Konstantin Kairos is listening, you're welcome to come on here as a guest. Just drop us a line. We'll set it up.
Yes, indeed.
If you're a Patreon under an assumed name.
Yeah. The other lawsuit updates I'll just do really quickly. They're much, much shorter than the one I just did, which was number one, the Titus O'Neil, Donald Anderson case continues to go on in California. Again, this was the swerved cameraman and the electric cattle prod. Basically, Titus O'Neil had said, I don't think this case should be heard in California at all. It should be dismissed due to jurisdiction because I don't live in California.